Have you ever found yourself agreeing to something you totally didn't want to do just to keep the peace? Or maybe apologizing for something that wasn't even your fault just to calm a situation down? Well, this isn't just about being nice. It's actually a super complex survival mechanism, a psychological program that's running in the background. This is what's known as the Fawning Response, and today we are going to pull this thing apart, piece by piece, to see exactly how it works. They expected you to fight, flee, or freeze, but you chose to agree, apologize, and appease. Why does compliance become the ultimate self-defense? This is the dark psychological paradox of the Fawning Response, a trauma-informed strategy that ultimately serves the abuser.
So to really unpack that paradox, we're going to follow a 6-part roadmap. First, we'll define what this response even is. Then, we'll get into its neurological wiring, explore the psychology driving it, and then, and this is key, we're going to shift to practical steps, how you can interrupt the program, and finally, how you can become your own source of safety.
So let's start at the very beginning. What exactly is fawning, and where does it even come from? Because it's way more than just simple people-pleasing. It's a survival program that for many of us has become seriously outdated. Okay, so here's the clinical definition. The fawning response is a trauma-informed coping strategy. When a person perceives a threat, and that word perceived is so important here, they react by becoming as pleasing, as helpful, and as compliant as they possibly can. The entire goal is to appease the threat, to basically neutralize it with agreeableness. It's a strategy that's born from situations where fighting back or running away just wasn't a safe option.
You know, most of us have heard about the classic 3F responses to danger: fight, flight, or freeze. Well, fawning is the fourth, often forgotten member of this survival instinct family. And it typically doesn't develop from a single traumatic event. It's more often associated with complex PTSD, that is, trauma that comes from long-term, repeated abuse. Think about it. When a person, especially a child, learns over and over that fighting back or trying to escape only makes things worse, they adapt. They learn that their safety might actually depend on their ability to be useful and agreeable to the person in power.
And this is where that dark paradox really starts to take shape. This brilliant survival adaptation becomes a major vulnerability. Manipulators, especially those with narcissistic traits, are drawn to the fawning response. And why wouldn't they be? It gives them exactly what they crave: predictable, low-effort control, and a steady stream of what's called narcissistic supply. That supply is basically their emotional fuel. It's validation, it's control, it's that feeling of importance. The fawner, who's just trying to stay safe, accidentally becomes an endless source of it. So, what does this actually look like in day-to-day life? Well, the behaviors can be pretty subtle. It's things like excessive apologizing, taking the blame just to smooth things over. It's chronically ignoring your own needs because they might conflict with what someone else wants. It's a compulsive need to agree, an almost physical inability to say no, even when you're completely tapped out. And maybe the biggest one of all, it's a constant state of hypervigilance. You become an expert at reading other people's moods. Every sigh, every gesture, every shift in tone is scanned for signs of trouble. And each one of these behaviors just reinforces the abuser's control and makes the fawner's own world feel smaller and smaller. So how does this response get so automatic that it feels less like a choice and more like a reflex? Well, to understand that, we have to look under the hood at the brain. This isn't just a conscious decision, it's a powerful neurological feedback loop that literally wires appeasement to a feeling of relief. This whole loop plays out in 3 steps. First, there's threat detection. Now, a manipulator doesn't have to scream. A tiny cue, a sigh of disapproval, a cold tone of voice, a dismissive look, that's all it takes. For the hypervigilant fawner, this instantly floods their system with stress hormones like cortisol. The internal alarm bells are going off. Step 2 is chemical suppression. The brain desperately wants that cortisol to stop, and the fastest way it's learned how to do that is to appease the source of the threat. The act of agreeing or pleasing gives a temporary release of the body's own calming chemicals like opioids and dopamine, and that feels like relief. It feels like safety. And this leads right into step 3, hypercompliance. The brain learns a simple equation: appeasement equals relief. So the fawner starts to compulsively prioritize the abuser's needs just to get that chemical fix and keep things stable. It pretty much becomes an addiction to a calm that is completely dependent on someone else's mood.
Now, if you look at this slide, you see the stark contrast in what each person is getting out of this whole exchange. The fawner, they get a brief, temporary moment of relief from intense stress. They manage to avoid an immediate crisis. But look at the manipulator side of the equation. They get effortless narcissistic supply and total control. And crucially, they reinforce the victim's dependency. The fawner has to keep coming back to the very source of their trauma for that next hit of chemical relief. It's a system that's perfectly designed for exploitation.
Okay, so we've covered the neurological how, but what about the psychological why? Why does this pattern feel so absolutely necessary to the person who's trapped inside of it? The answer is really in the deep, competing motivations that are at the heart of this entire dynamic.
For the fawner, the core motivation is primal. It's all about safety and anxiety reduction. Everything they do is driven by this deep, often subconscious terror of being lashed out at, or worse, abandoned. The fear is existential. But for the manipulator, the motivation is all about convenience, effortless supply, and impunity. They want to get the most compliance with the absolute least amount of effort. Their goal is to create a world where they're never challenged, never questioned, and never held accountable.
This whole dynamic gives rise to a really powerful cognitive distortion known as magical thinking. This is the subconscious belief that if you can just be perfect enough, or useful enough, or quiet enough, you can actually control the abuser's unpredictable behavior. It's an attempt to put logic and order onto a situation that is totally chaotic and illogical. It's that desperate voice in your head that says, if I do everything right, they won't get mad. I can stop the storm before it starts. And this isn't a flaw, it's a coping mechanism, designed to create an illusion of control where there is none.
And here's the bottom line. The psychological cost of all this is immense. That intense, all-consuming drive to maintain external peace, to keep the abuser calm, it systematically starts to override the fawner's own internal world. Their needs, their opinions, their desires, and eventually their own sense of self-worth get pushed down, silenced, and can even feel like they've disappeared completely. The self gets sacrificed for the sake of someone else's emotional regulation.
All right, so we've analyzed the problem, the neurology, the psychology. Now let's pivot from analysis to action. The goal here is to move from that automated appeasement to conscious autonomy. We have to find the off switch for this outdated survival program.
So this is the essential question, isn't it? If this whole thing is an automated program that was built for survival, how do you even begin to break that cycle of compulsive compliance? I mean, it feels as reflexive as pulling your hand away from a hot stove. But here's the good news. It can be done.
The whole process really starts with 3 core defense tactics. First, you have to identify the trigger response chain. This is all about becoming a detective of your own inner world. You have to consciously recognize the exact moment a trigger, that sigh, that tone of voice, creates that overwhelming urge to appease. Awareness is the first step. Second, you have to use the assertive pause. This is your circuit breaker. When you feel that impulse to please surge, you intentionally create a small gap. Just 5 seconds is all it takes before you react. And third, you practice boundary assertion. Now, this doesn't mean starting with some huge confrontation. It just means setting small, non-negotiable boundaries for yourself. Let's focus on that assertive pause for a second because it is so powerful. In that 5-second gap that you create for yourself, you ask one revolutionary question. What is my need right now? For someone who's been programmed to constantly monitor and serve the needs of others, this question is a radical act. It shifts the focus from what do they want from me to what do I need for myself. It's the very beginning of taking back your own internal space.
And when you do start practicing asserting boundaries, it is vital that you refuse to jade. Jade is an acronym. It stands for justify, argue, defend, or explain. See, a manipulator wants you to jade. It pulls you right into their game, into a debate where they can twist your words and just wear you down. A healthy boundary doesn't need a 5-page essay. I'm not available to discuss that right now is a complete sentence. No is a complete sentence. Refusing to jade basically starves the manipulator of the conflict that they feed on.
And this brings us to our final, and honestly our most important section. All of these tools, all of these insights, they're really about one thing: shifting the source of your safety from something external and unpredictable to something internal and stable. It's about becoming your own safe harbor.
Look, if there is one thing you take away from this entire explainer, let it be this. Your fawning response is not a personal failure. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a brilliant adaptive survival mechanism that got you through an impossible situation. It's proof of how resourceful the human mind is. The mechanism isn't broken. It's just outdated. It's time to thank it for getting you through and then gently retire it.
So as we wrap this up, let's bring it all home. At the end of the day, awareness is what breaks the loop. You have to see the fawning response for exactly what it is: a people-pleasing survival mode, a system that was designed to provide a manipulative person with effortless narcissistic supply, all in exchange for a temporary feeling of safety.
And you have to remember the automated pattern that keeps that whole thing running. A subtle threat gets detected, which triggers a flood of stress chemicals. The brain then scrambles for immediate chemical suppression by appeasing, and that leads to hypercompliance, that compulsive need to manage someone else's emotions just to avoid a crisis.
But awareness breaks that loop. By using the assertive pause to ask what you need, and by practicing boundary assertion without apology or explanation, you stop playing your part in the manipulator's system. You effectively fire the abuser from the job of regulating your emotions. And in their place, you hire yourself as the primary source of your own safety. And that is how you finally shut down that outdated program and step into your own autonomy.